Well, I'm here today with Mary Porterfield. Mary, thank you so much for checking in with me.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
You're very welcome. So we're going to look at some recent artwork as well as some artwork from the past. So which artwork would you like to start with?
I'd like to start with a painting entitled Seized, because that was really the beginning of how I worked for a very long time. And my also was the impetus for changing my direction recently.
Okay.
So the image Seized, it's of a tornado full of multiple elderly figures. And what had happened, one of my first jobs was at St. Louis University Hospital, and I work as an occupational therapist part-time. And I was assigned to a geriatric unit, and it was my job to assess elderly patients that showed early signs of dementia. And I had to determine if they were safe to continue living at home or if they needed some sort of supervision. And so I did these very thorough evaluations. And as a result of some of my testing, some of these patients then went on to nursing homes. And I often felt a lot of guilt over that, almost feeling as if I sentenced them there, although I knew made the right professional decision for their safety. So that led me to do a lot of thinking about what would it be like to have memory loss and be placed in an environment that's completely foreign. So those early images, and Seized was really the first image I had completed on in this series, was really about memory loss and feeling as if you're part of something with which you can't escape. And
Okay.
it occurred to me with dementia, the patients appear so normal from far away, normal on a cognitive level. But then when you converse with them, you see that their mind can be functioning on a really chaotic level. So I wanted my paintings to have that same similarity, that from a distance, there was an illusion of normality. But then up close, you see the chaotic levels of the painting. And I was playing with perspective. You could see small images of the figures that were of my grandmother, and I can hold one up here if you can see that. I took hundreds of pictures of her as my model. So I played with different perspectives because I wanted to also show that there's moments where the mind is in tune to what's being said, and there's other moments where the mind might be in a state of lack of clarity. So I wanted the altered perspectives to represent that the altered thought process that I was seeing.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And then
Any
with time, I thought a lot of, I worked on that series about 5 years. And then I began to ask myself, why was I so obsessed with this topic? Why was I painting landscapes? And it occurred to me that I have a hard time accepting what I can't change. And I thought further, and I realized that that's really why I was painting landscape imagery, because it represented something beyond our control. No matter what you do, you can't change nature. All the therapy in the world can't change Alzheimer's disease. So it was sort of an epiphany for me to realize why I was drawn to the subject matter. And then I kept thinking further about that. And that led to the next painting, which I sent you, entitled Pool of Life. And in that painting, it grew to be a lot more personal. And it was different narratives about my patients, not just about Alzheimer's disease, but all types of patients I've had in the past with severe disabilities and the difficulty accepting what you can't change. And I was actually raised in a really religious environment. I was raised Catholic. My mom goes to church every day. And when I was a young girl, my mom would read me the stories of saints as bedtime stories. And that's the absolute truth. So I grew up thinking that to give selflessly and unconditionally was the ideal way to live life. And it was hard to reconcile that as an occupational therapist and working in healthcare, because you can give unconditionally and selflessly, but there were still things, there were still situations that were beyond what I could affect. And so if you look at that painting, I actually have saints on some of the plateaus on the side, and then I have other younger figures at the time I was younger women turning away from those saints. It was my own evolution, realizing that I had to accept that there were times I couldn't make that impact I wanted to have. So the images still grew a lot more personal. I was still gratefully using my grandmother as my model for a lot of the patients, but it became more in tune with my own feelings, and using religious iconography that reflected how I was raised.
Okay. Okay.
And then
Thanks for explaining that.
what happened then, and that's why I started out with the painting seized. I was working in this vein for so long of having these landscapes full of hundreds of multi-figured elements, and they became more obsessive, and the multi-figured elements became more detailed, and they got tighter and they got smaller. And I had my second show at the Packer Shop Gallery in 2015, and there was an artist I greatly respect who came up to me and he said, "How does it feel that no one knows what you're saying?" And I thought a lot about that. And I thought, he's right. Because when I talked about my work, as I'm doing now, I found myself talking about the narratives, talking about um, the what I wanted to express. And I found, because they were so detailed and so obsessive, my message was being lost. And so that was, I really had to take a step back. And that's when I changed to drawing now as my primary medium. And I was fortunate enough a few years ago to have a critique with Jerry Saltz, and he recommended I look at the work of Eric Fischl. And I think it was back in the 80s, Eric Fischl had done these beautiful drawings of oil paint on layered glassine, and the glassine was layered in an irregular fashion, but I thought they were gorgeous. And I looked at those, and Jerry Saltz recommended that I research them also. And I thought, well, Jerry Saltz tells you to do something, he's probably right. And so I did that. And, I researched those images, and I decided to just focus on the story. And I remember when I was in grad school, I had a classmate, Todd McDonald, and he said once in a critique, he said, "Start thinking of the painter you want to be 10 years from now and work that way now." And when I think of the artist I want to be in 10 years or 20 years, it's a narrative artist. I love the idea of telling an interesting story. I hope a story that has an impact. I hope a story that's personal. I feel deep down, the more personal you make something, the more universal it becomes. So it was time for me to shift. And so I still, again, was using my grandmother as my model, but I went to these singular images with a white background to draw attention to the narrative. And I love the idea of layering, because I have obsessive tendencies in my art. Um, I don't have obsessive tendencies with cleaning or other things, but somehow with my work ethic, I tend to be obsessive. But with the layering, it brought this intuitive element to the work. When I did these layered images on glassine, I never knew how they would turn out. I would do several images. I never knew how they'd be layered, what would be on top, what would be underneath. I was left with a surprise, and I loved that. It brought joy back to making art again. It wasn't so methodical. And the other thing is, as I'm getting older myself, it became more and more important for me to take these small elements of the figure, and again, they were of my grandmother, and make them larger, because I sincerely wanted to bring more attention to the elderly in my work. If I have one hope in my art, it's to bring attention to people who are aging and who have been so often been neglected in the arts, and in many different elements and fields. So it was very meaningful to me to make these larger. And that image, the image then that I included, entitled "In Silence," that image is based on the many patients I've had who have fallen and they couldn't get up. And I've had so many, I can't even tell you. I work part-time at a hospital on the Northwest side, and there's so many occasions where someone is elderly, they live alone, they fall. Sometimes they're waiting 1 or 2 days hoping to be found. I can't even imagine what's going through their minds. I used to see a lot more, but now with MedAlert and and the life care buttons that people can push. I don't see it as often, but it's still common to fall and be waiting and hoping for help. So that's what that image was about. And that's why you have the different scenes of my grandmother lying on the floor. And then me being me and just obsessing about this topic and thinking about it so much and really reflecting on my career, I also wanted to draw attention to those caregivers because I've now been an occupational therapist for 26 years. And what's really been an eye-opener for me in the last 5 years or so has been the stress put on caregivers. And I really wanted to show that, and a lot had been changing in my own family. My aunt was caring for my grandmother. My mother now is caring for my father with Parkinsonianism. So that became my new mission, and I really wanted to draw on personal narratives. So in that image you see, it's of my grandmother sitting in the wheelchair, and the caregiver, which represents my aunt, is holding her arm, shielding these vultures flying around. And her hope is to save the elderly figure from these dangerous elements. But in all actuality, it's the caregiver that's put at more risk.
Okay.
And that really led to this last body of work, and you're one of the first to see it. I had it photographed on Tuesday. So I'm now working on a new series about my mom's struggle caring for my father with Parkinsonianism. It's maybe hard to tell from the image, but they're basically life size. They go from the floor to the ceiling. I'm out of wall space actually. So what I do is I have these giant 90-inch pieces of paper, and I nail them to my wall, and then I layer paper over paper. So I'm making fake walls, and I'm trying to put these together on PowerPoint to figure out the placement. But this is all new work, and it was important for me to show her struggle. My dad is homebound now, and the highlight of his day is when my mom serves some breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a tray. So I wanted to use the element as a tray, as an architectural form to support him, because it's so fragile. You don't know when it will give way, but yet she has the strength to keep doing it. So.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure, absolutely.
You mentioned the word obsessive in your work.
Mm-hmm.
How does that trait of being obsessive, how is that manifesting itself in your work?
Well, I think especially in the older pieces like Seized and the image Full of Life, and the work that I did basically from, I would say, 99 to, oh gosh, probably 2015. That's wow, at least 15 years, 16 years. I would paint hundreds of figures over and over again. And I on my studio wall in my studio in grad school, I would draw out the figures with fine charcoal, and I would write how many I'd have to paint. So a lot of my images had 300 some figures. So every time I painted a figure, I made a mark on the wall, and I would literally count how many more figures I'd have to make that 300 or 398. It was very methodical, and I had a very kind of strict order to how I did things. I did the underpainting with acrylic, and then I methodically drew several hundred figures with fine charcoal, and then I methodically painted one after the other. And then in the older work, I would lie down stencils to kind of break up the figures, fragment them. But there was this need to complete all those figures. If there was one figure missing, I felt the painting was lacking something. There was
Okay.
something only I would notice. So that was my way of being obsessive.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about with these newer ones? You had mentioned you would use the word obsessive with even these latest ones that you're doing. How does it show up in those?
It shows up in just the nuances of the hand. Like I get caught up in making the wrinkles of the skin along a finger, or the creases in a fabric. But I feel that because of the layering, the obsessiveness isn't as tight. There's more of an intuitive quality. So I might be obsessive with each individual figure, But then when I layer them, I don't have the slightest idea how it's going to end up. So there's an open-endedness to how I'm working, which I'm really enjoying. Like when I started out my older work, I had an idea what I wanted to do, and I kept at it till I accomplished what was in my mind. And now I have a vague idea. I really don't know how it will end up, but I'm a lot more interested in the story. So I just keep painting the figures. I play around with layering. They're attached with pins, so I can rearrange my story. I can change the overlap, and that's a lot more enjoyable for me. I like this freedom that I've had. For me, it's freedom. For other people, they might still see it as obsessive, but for me, it's really fun.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you for sharing that. I did have one other question.
Mhm.
You obviously, your artwork is a way for you to process, deal with, help with stresses in life, or just making sense of things in life. You mentioned, of course, your work situation as being an occupational therapist and observing and interacting with people, which are, potentially very difficult situations. And then obviously the situation with family members, which many people have to go through, which is always very difficult, very painful. I had to go through something myself. You, however, unlike others, you have this tool available to you to help you. It sounds like it's very helpful. What do you think of that? Do you think of yourself as being lucky, grateful that you have something like this that other people just don't?
I do, especially in a pandemic where, although I am still working at the hospital, basically, like everyone else being forced to be home, I'm really grateful I have something I can work on that I feel passionate about, and I think in this series is new about my mom caring for my dad, but in past work, it helped me resolve questions even if I never really was given an answer. But for example, the struggle to accept what I can't change. I never did have an answer to that, but I realize it's okay. And that's part of my career and that's part of life. And the struggle to live up to ideals, which I may not be able to live up to, I realized, that's okay too. A lot of other people struggle with those same things. So it took me 15 years of work, and I can't even tell you how many thousands upon thousands of figures I painted. But to come to those realizations was helpful. So yes, it has been therapeutic, and especially now in a pandemic, I am very grateful I have this, and it's been very productive, which is good.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for walking me through all this artwork. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And it was particularly wonderful hearing the background. And it's obviously much more meaningful to me to hear the background to all of it.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you doing this and allowing me to speak about my work and the service you provide. Thank you, Rick.
You're very welcome.